Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Catholic Peekskill. I'm Father John Higgins, pastor of Assumption Church in Peekskill, and your host for this public access television show. So glad you could join us today, especially today. It was just a few weeks ago from the time of this broadcast that Peekskill in general and Assumption Church in particular suffered a great loss with the death of the beloved Monsignor Francis Ansbro. He arrived at Assumption Church on September 17th, 1966, and was a constant figure of strength and faith and support for our parish for 47 years until his final passing on the night of November 6th, 2013. Tonight we thought it would be fitting that we would have a retrospective, a look back to the wonderful times that we enjoyed at Assumption Parish. Joining me tonight is Father Vernon Wickramatunga and Father Vincent Druding to talk about our times with Monsignor in these last several years. Everyone who was present at Monsignor Ansbro's funeral knew what an incredible experience it was, what an uplifting moment it was for the church and for Assumption Parish in Peekskill, and the marvelous job that the preacher gave, Father Mike Morrow, when he spoke about the life of Monsignor Ansbro. He spoke about Monsignor in his more vigorous years, and yet the priests who were with me, Father Vernon and Father Vincent, we knew Monsignor in the later years of his life, and yet they were years that were very rich in blessings. Father Vincent and Father Vernon, thank you so much for being on Catholic Peekskill tonight. Maybe we could start with you, Father Vernon. Tell us a little bit about your experience of knowing Monsignor Ansbro, meeting him and then living him throughout these over 13 years.
In 1999, the end of 99 actually, I was waiting to hear from Monsignor Ansbro about my new assignment with Peekskill Assumption. And excuse me, so I was given a number to call, and it's supposed to be he was in his favorite place in Muncie. I did call him and set the date to come and meet with him before the end of the year, 99. I have already made plans to go away to New London for the New Year's, and then he said, no, it's okay, go ahead, just go ahead, and when you come back, just give me a call and I'll meet with you. And then he said, I would never ever let any priest go through what I went through one time when I was a young priest. And he did mention saying he was supposed to go to, I think it was Pearl River, to the church, and they called the pastor and asked when he's supposed to be expected. The pastor said, this Saturday at 5 o'clock we have confessions. And he said he had plans to spend about 2 weeks before he got the next assignment, but he didn't want to let me go through that. So that's how we started, with May being very kind, very concerned about and letting me do whatever I wanted to do and then come back. So I came back, had the meeting with him, and I started working in Assumption. Monsignor as my pastor since January 14th. So I've been with him, I'm still here, and with him till 2006, when he retired. Yeah, there's so many things you can talk about Monsignor, very especially about his kindness, his generosity, and how much he loved the priest. And one quality I can say is about how he's so good with any age group. It's any seminarian or any young kids, or no matter what age it is, he knows how to relate, especially at the dinner table when we have the guests. But he would not let anybody feel like not welcome, or even if the person doesn't speak English, but he'll make sure. Had some experiences, when we had the Spanish priest who could not speak English, he would be talking to the Spanish priest in English. It doesn't even look at me. I was thinking to myself, come on, that guy, he doesn't even understand. But he makes sure that he makes them understand. And at least try to turn some English words into Spanish, in his own way. Yeah. One of the times it was like, asking the priest about if he has been to any restaurants in New York. He had no idea what he was talking about, but he said, restaurante. So the guy understood something talking about, he went like this, about eating. I said, yeah, in Spanish, okay. Yeah, there are times, he could show you if he does not appreciate something, but he would not hurt your feeling. Yeah. But he has a way of making you know. I know it. It has happened a few times with me. But he would never, ever keep anything as a grudge. Yeah. Never would mention that. And makes feel so welcome. And there were times I used to go back to him and say later, maybe hours later, say, I'm sorry, Monsignor, about something, I said or did. I thought, oh, don't forget about it. I don't even remember what you did, that's fine, it's okay. And so, sorry, he wasn't in good health during that period of time. I mean, he was doing okay as a pastor, but health-wise, he was not too good. And, we've been taking care of him, and you too, of course, you were there at the latter part, how started checking his sugar, and because of his diabetes. And one thing I would like to mention is about at night when we check his sugar, he would always mention if it is high, he come up with an excuse, You probably heard it many times. I think maybe it's the orange juice we had, and, maybe it's the, something. But then say, maybe something with less sugar will be fine. So then here I go like, less sugar, everything is sugar. There's nothing sugar-free in the refrigerator. Monsignor, how about some, vanilla ice cream? That's the only thing, Oh, that's okay, that's fine. But if you go around that corner, you might find something. And so very lovingly, I know I did it and you all did it too. He very well appreciated everything we did. And I'm so fortunate to have him as my pastor for first 6 years of Assumption, and make me feel very comfortable. And now you as my pastor, 14 years in Assumption. Wonderful experience to know such a wonderful gentleman. I mean, he is like one of the reporters said, giant, a gentleman. Has so many good qualities. He shared, anytime when he had his 50th anniversary, I remember all the gifts he received, especially, money-wise, he would share with the priest. That's so wonderful, and I'm very grateful for him, for everything he did in his life to make me feel comfortable. And there's so many other things I'm thinking about. Maybe you can pass on to Father. Okay. Yeah, if you think of something, I'll mention here. Thank you.
Father Vincent, how about yourself? What was your experience? You've only been at Assumption for 2.5 years. What's your experience of Monsignor Ansbro?
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Love the man. Love the man. Brought me so much joy. I always say that Monsignor Ansbro always made you feel better about yourself. He always picked you up and lifted you up. He had a gift for that. And not just us as priests, but anybody. I would always notice when a visitor would come to his room, he always tried to make them feel better about themselves. And it was a real gift and a real sign of his priesthood. When I arrived, I received a letter from Monsignor Robert Traynor, who's down in the Bronx at Sacred Heart, who's also a retired priest. And he said, congratulations on getting assigned to Assumption. While you're up there, you're going to be with Monsignor Francis Ansbro. Hang on every word that he says. Hang on every word that he says, filled with a lot of wisdom. And so from the beginning, I paid a lot of attention to what he said. And a lot of things come back now thinking about it. And as a priest, I was still only 2 years out of the seminary, so I had a lot to learn, and I feel like God gave me like an old master just to kind of sit and just to be fed from. And that's what was easy about hanging around Monsignor. You didn't have to do the work. He liked to talk. He liked to share. And so I was all ears, ready to receive, trying to hang on his words. And in the process, I laughed a lot of laughter. I have to say one of my favorite hours of the day was when we'd have dinner together. And hearing the stories, like any good father, he repeats his stories, but he's got some classics when he was 39 and he had the heart attack, but they were such good guys I was playing basketball with, of course. So I was kind of introduced to the litany of Monsignorisms and Monsignor stories around the dinner table. But beyond that, of course, there's so much to him. Profound kindness, gentleness, and goodness. And I feel like he really radiated goodness. As a priest, some things I take away from him. I remember he often would say the advice he would give to penitents in the confessional is, if you're having trouble or if you're having a need for God, just call on the Holy Spirit and he will come. And I remember hearing that, and I started to do that myself, and it works. And I started encouraging people to do the same, to call on the Holy Spirit who's living and real, and he comes. And I think that kind of characterizes his spirituality, which was very simple. He loved the Lord, and he served the Lord very simply, pure heart, and such a good man, and so funny. I used to get a kick out of the way that actually you and him would give each other a hard time sometimes, especially around dinner. And Monsignor had a gift also to be able to try to make a little joke, but never as you mentioned in the eulogy, never would hurt anybody's feelings. Not only if he was a little upset, but when he was also having a good little joke between someone. And one example was he often would say, you would come in and try to get him to laugh and say, "Have you been crying, Monsignor? Have you been crying?" And he would respond without thinking, "Only when I think of the pastor." And that was Monsignor.
I was his favorite victim, I think.
You did. I enjoyed watching the rapport between the two of you, to tell you the truth. I remember some dinners that we would eat, because honestly, the majority of the time I think I spent with him was probably at the dinner table, because our days are filled with activity, and he was very consistent with meals. For his breakfast, I know the rectory staff dearly misses the Monsignor in the kitchen in the mornings. He would always come in and light us up with a big smile and ask how everybody's doing. And everybody misses the breakfasts with Monsignor. But for us, it was the dinners, and he was always able. Sometimes we would speak in Irish accents over dinner, and Monsignor, he was very good with that. And then he would pull out things that would surprise you, like he could start singing in Greek. He knew like a song in Greek. I used to love his antics about playing the violin. When, he would do one of these if somebody really got somebody, or if he was excited. Sometimes we get a little excited. And he would play the violin. One story I loved that he used to tell was when he was in seminary, he used to talk about Potowski, the great preacher there in seminary that taught them homiletics, and he said, I always gave it a shot. When I was called upon in seminary, I always stepped up, and I wanted to get my practice so I could preach, And he says, but the guys in the back of the class, they'd be doing this the whole time when I'm trying to preach. He'd be doing this. And he's such a good sport. I have to say, we gave him such a hard time so many times. Not only at dinner, in his room, and he was such a good sport, and only returned it with love. I know, he used to give me a hard time because I used to have a beard when I came, and it was scruffy and ridiculous, actually. And I thought I would be a Franciscan, but wasn't meant to be. And so for the way of the cross, I grew it, and then I shaved on Easter Vigil, and I came into his room. He says, "You look so much better, so much better." And he had a good way of encouraging a guy, and something that was good for him. And such a great spirit. I miss him dearly. I loved him, but I know he's in the glory of heaven. And I'm so grateful for the time I had to hang on his every word and to serve him. It was really a joy to serve him. I wish I'd also say he was my regular confessor. It's not easy sometimes to get out. I have a spiritual director, but it's hard to get down to see in the city. And so I'd often go to Monsignor for confession. Very convenient. Just come down the hall. "Hey, Monsignor." Always ready to hear confession. Never any. And I think in his older years when he wasn't able to get out, I think he appreciated to practice his ministry. And what a gentle confessor, what a great confessor. So many times he was so merciful, and he had such a good way of giving a little correction, but in a real merciful way that lifted you up afterward. And I'm so grateful, I think probably most of all, for all the confessions he heard from me and helped my soul develop as a priest.
Oh, well said, Father Vincent. Thank you both. I mean, if I look back on my own experience, I arrived in 2005, and I was first as a parochial vicar for that first year. And again, I felt like I could learn from a master too. And especially at the point you made, Father Vernon, his great sensitivity about the feelings of everybody. He was very sensitive about the sensitivities of others. But for me, it was a kind of a dramatic moment. I remember when we weren't sure what was going to happen. Would I move on? Would I become pastor? And he said all the time how his great desire was to stay at Assumption and Peekskill. And so I remember when I got the letter, I opened it up. The first thing I did, I went to Monsignor. I said, Monsignor, I got the letter confirming me as pastor, and so I'd like to make my very first act with the knowledge I will be pastor to ask you if you please stay on. And I know he was very grateful for that, and I didn't know how grateful I would become for his saying yes to the invitation to please stay, that his desire matched our desire as well. But I remember one fateful day, then actually the day that we changed leadership so that he stayed on now as a pastor emeritus, and he always said emeritus means without merit, which is false. He would always say that. It means out of merit, that it's because of his merit that he's still carries the title pastor. But when I came down just a minute or two late for dinner, I was going to sit at my usual place, and I couldn't because he had moved his place from the head of the table to take the humble spot as the assistant, and I took his place. It was just one little sign of his great gentlemanliness, and there were so many others. And you know, he felt very, very reluctant to interfere, and yet on the other hand to always support what a successor does. And in a normal give and take, there's a big difference there. So I agree that our time together was highlighted at the meals and the joys. And one fugue, one refrain that keeps repeating was his great love for desserts. There was no doubt. And every meal practically, he said, you know, when the main meal's here, I don't have much of an appetite, but when the dessert comes, I'm a new person. I recall one story when one of our dear cooks, Louisa Bell, was first time cooking and saw Monsignor's little plate. He ate so little and of delicious food that she had prepared. She thought maybe he wasn't feeling well, wasn't very hungry, and so brought a proportionate amount of ice cream out for dessert. And when she put it in front of him, he couldn't believe his eyes, and he said, oh, come on! He wanted the full portion of ice cream. It had nothing to do with what he ate for his main meal. But we learned quickly that his great love for desserts. But you know, earlier on, he had vigor because he came as a young man. Even though he'd had those heart attacks, he was tall and handsome. Someone said that he reminded him of Clark Kent. And yet later on he grew greater in communion with Christ's sufferings, and especially for those final months. And that was a privilege to see him suffer as a saint would suffer, to suffer like Christ himself. But I know even throughout that whole time he would always continue to pour out his wisdom, his pearls of wisdom. Do you remember some of the things he used to say, some of his refrains, some of his proverbs or quotations that occurred to you?
Well, I mean, we could probably go the rounds and maybe be reminded. I mean, you mentioned about you know, the things at dinner. I mean, often, you know, when you come in, you say, "How are you doing?" in the breakfast, and he would respond, "Compared to whom? Compared to whom?" And sometimes they were phrases that didn't actually have a meaning, like you know, as you mentioned, one time he would often say, you know, "What can you say once you've said gefilte fish?" Well, you could say it again. You know, funny little sayings. Peace and understanding. I think everybody remembers him for the peace and understanding.
Not cranky.
Yeah.
Something
How are you
like
feeling? What would he say?
Not cranky.
Not too cranky.
Not too cranky. You know, one of the things I remember is, again at the dinner table, he came up with this story about how they decided to give up having coffee during Lent. Excuse me. So his classmates in the major seminary in Dunwoody decided to do that, and they did. No coffee during Lent. And then Easter came on, and then after Easter, some of them went back to having coffee, but Monsignor said that there were a few others didn't want to have coffee at all. They just stayed without having coffee, even after Easter. And he said, they're all gone now. You know, make me feel like, you know, because they did not drink coffee at all, they died, you know. I mean, we had a good laugh that day. I don't know if you were there when he said this story. I was laughing like crazy because, you know, it made me feel. I said, Monsignor, thanks a lot that you started having your coffee, that you are still here with us.
Well, you know, the topic of death was a frequent topic around Monsignor, not only of his own death, but having buried over 3,000 people only in Peekskill.
Oh my God, yeah.
We would often talk about, you know, death, and he was able to joke freely about his own death.
Yeah.
And so I always appreciated it. And I think, you know, people would understand that, you know, we could give him a hard time about him dying, because we joked that he'd been dying for 47 years since he had his heart attacks at 39 with his brain aneurysm, his cancers, his diabetes, all of his conditions. And but he was tough. He was like a tank. And I remembered one time, you know, you had quipped to me, Father, that, you know, you'd thought about how could you title like a eulogy for Monsignor Ansbro. It could be something like "Always Going but Never Gone." And he, of course, would laugh at that. I think I remembered at the wake, some people had come and they were really, truly, sincerely sorry to have missed him. Absolutely. And they were expressing how sorry they were and how much we must feel, you know, really so sad. And yet, we had been so prepared for his death because he himself had made peace with his own death. Yes. He knew he was on his way to glory. And so there wasn't a sense of tremendous grief, at least I feel on my own part. I won't speak for you guys, because we knew that he had paid his debts. Mm-hmm. He had suffered so much. And that when he died, it was a celebration. And he had been waiting for so long to enter into heaven. He jokes that he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll be in purgatory. Father John will be zooming by and say, hey, Johnny, you know, waving at him." But we know Monsignor probably had the express train for all that he suffered, for all the good that he did in his life. But I have to say, you know, just it gave me a good perspective that we don't have to fear death, you know, and we can be open about it. And I found it a very healthy approach that he had towards dying and death.
At the wake, many people came forward and would say how Monsignor helped them out financially in some very material way, way back years before, or maybe not so many years before. And one of his refrains, as he was doing some act of charity, which he would usually hide, but if it couldn't be hidden, he would say something like, or these exact words, "Hey, you can't spend it from purgatory."
Yes.
Yeah.
He has said that. Yeah.
That's right.
And we would come back and say, "Aren't you being a little bit presumptuous, Monsignore?" Yeah. As his strength grew dim, though, you recall it was just a few days before he died, the situation with that tree in the back property of the rectory. This noble and elegant, massive tree, which had been there for maybe 160 years, it was reaching the point where it had to come down. It was dying, and it was dying fast, and it was actually becoming a danger to Aunt Bessie's nearby and some of the rectory building and the building on the side of the rectory. And what a dramatic thing it was to see that tree itself come down limb by limb, piece by piece, very professionally, by the Garrison Tree Company as they mounted the bucket and took it down that way. And for us, it came somehow like a metaphor of just that this very same week, just but 2 days apart, the falling of that great European birch tree and the falling of this wonderful priest among priests. I recall those years. You remember that his last day in the rectory with us was September 11th, which was a little bit less than 2 months before his passing. How he was brought by ambulance to the hospital, and there he spent a couple weeks, and then our goal was always to get him back to the rectory if he could. But because he needed a little bit more time to gather strength, we had hoped, perhaps against hope, that his time in the nursing home could somehow be a way for him to regather his strength again. But as it turns out, it wasn't meant to be. And then he was brought in the middle of the night to Phelps Hospital from Skyview Nursing Home. And I would have to say that the hospital, the field home, Skyview, and Phelps had done just a wonderful job, loving, reverent, respectful care for him. And it was hard for him when he was on the intubator and under sedation. But when the doctors judged that the best thing for him would be that the sedation come out, that he come off the sedation to an extent and not have the respirator, he was able to breathe on his own, and he was able to understand that we were there for him. And what a wonderful time, and that was the most privileged time of his life, I feel, where He was conscious of what was going around. He had lost his capacity to speak anymore. He really couldn't speak. The only way he could communicate was perhaps a nod of the head or a squeeze of the hand. You remember how we were all there by his bedside when he would hold our hands, and if you just made to pull away, he would squeeze it as if to say,
He would let go.
don't leave me,
Yeah.
stay. Or maybe it's, I appreciate you. He barely had strength to get that squeeze out. And as the days rolled on there, that was on a Monday, I know that his one last great desire was that the Cardinal do his funeral. And worked it out. Had Monsignor died just an hour later, it just wouldn't have been possible. I'm even getting choked up as I think about it. But I remember saying, Monsignor, I'll be back at 9 o'clock, and I just have to shave. I gotta say mass. I'll offer it, and I offered a mass of thanksgiving for his wonderful life, but I didn't make it back in time. So I'm surprised again by my own emotions, but he did pass at 9 o'clock that night, and as a tribute to him, like the parish set in motion this wonderful and beautiful funeral, which we did quickly in order to accommodate his last wish of having the Cardinal there with him, which we managed to pull off at 11 o'clock that following Friday. And what a beautiful funeral it was. He died on November 6th, and he was laid to rest on November 8th, the following Friday. And it was a tremendous outpouring of love. But it doesn't end there. You know, it was St. Therese who said, I will spend my heaven doing good on earth. We've not heard the end of Monsignor. May he rest in peace with the Lord. So we will say, we ask God's special blessing on his soul and on us as we continue to reap the harvest. Join me, brothers, as we pray. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord.
And let perpetual light shine upon him.
May he rest in peace.
Amen.
Amen.
May his soul
And
the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this special episode of Catholic Peekskill. God bless you and good night.
Hosanna in excelsis, Hosanna in